All right, it's 3:02. We're going to go ahead and call this Tuesday, October 6th work session to order. In the boardroom, currently board member Bellamy is present, as well as Dr. Bishop. Online, I have myself, member Marcette, member Holloman, member Hildy, and member Donley online. Is when board member Mitchell shows up, we will go ahead and get her accounted for. I am going to ask if Miss Margot can log into Zoom while she's there, the same that we did before, just so I can see her hand, because the little blue hand, because I'm not going to be able to see it through the little Brady Bunch square. So we have two topics on our work session today. The first one up is the strategic plan update, and hopefully everybody had a chance to get onto board docs and download or print the board goals and the board guardrails that are attached to this meeting agenda. The purpose of circling back around onto this right now is it is also listed as an action item on tonight's agenda. And there's just a brief memo attached to it. And what we want to do is, at the will of the board tonight, adopt these draft goals and guardrails so that we can take them out to the public in the much broader conversation, and hopefully come back in December to adopt them as our final goals and guardrails, so that we have a plan, you know, for our kids going forward. We do know that there have been adjustments made since the last time we talked. We looked at making it more of a 6-year window, so not really to include this year. So the bracketing of when we take a look at stuff. So right now I want to open it up to Dr. Bishop to see if she has any comments, clarifications, things to add. I saw the guardrails got posted. I know that there's some little highlights in here on some of the goals, so I wanted to hand it over to you to see if you had anything you wanted to ask, and then we'll open it up to the floor and see what questions board members have.
Thank you, Madam President. Katie Grant is getting them up on the screen now, as well as we are getting some in hard copies for those that need them here present in the boardroom. I did want to share that we have added to it, especially to the guardrails in particular. We've taken the board's suggestions from last time and made some changes. So I'll go through those. If we pulled the board goals, the first two, I want to share with you that the data points that we actually have been placed in yellow. You can see that highlighted area there in this draft. And so we wanted to demonstrate that we do have those as the starting point. We're continuing to do some analysis as to the appropriate SMART goals for the interim over that time. So we'll continue to adjust those and look at those. The areas for which we do not have that data that's demonstrated, that will get placed in there. Particularly if you look at, we're looking at this spring to the next spring. So we look to have those data. If you go to goal number 2, which is a math goal, you'll see this similar. We do have the starting point for those data in regard to MAP, growth, and peaks assessment, which of course is the state assessment. The federal government has stated that at this present time, states will proceed with their state testing, but that can change just according to how events in our nation changes. So I just wanted to share that we are on track. We are not moving to a new assessment. While they did do an RFP for a new assessment, it did not come to fruition during this time. They're going to stick with the same assessment. If you look down to number 3, the third goal, you'll notice that this was a quite extensive goal, and some notes were at the bottom in regard to the interim data that we will use. Oh, you were right. If you go down to the yellow, yep, that's correct, right Right there, please. Thank you. So these were the interim items that we were looking at in regard to a starting point. We do have the spring of 2020 GPAs. We're looking at the online course, successfully completing an online course. And this is not necessarily a Zoom live course. This would be more of an independent course. So presently about 1/4 of our students have done that. And then we're looking at what the suggestion is from our secondary department in establishing the financial literacy. There are financial literacy mini courses within major courses, so it was very difficult for us to get a baseline. And so there's some suggestions from ASD secondary rather, on how they will proceed. If we move to the interim, I just want to give you a basis for the changes there, the interim guardrails rather, on the next document. And again, just as review, a guardrail is an operational action or class of actions, strategic and not tactical, in which the superintendent may not use or allow in pursuit of the district's student outcomes and goals. And so sometimes in education, we don't really write these in that negative sense of you may not do this, but it's really in an effort to build the capacity of governing boards to not direct the work, but actually demonstrate the values and vision of the community in which what they believe shouldn't be done. Again, the guidance comes from the Council of Great City Schools in which the board worked. So the first guardrail that the board suggests there in regard to not leaving student groups underrepresented in lottery programs, and the two items we have listed that we can accomplish. The next one in 2 is a little bit different in regard to how a SMART goal is written. And I can have Matt Tiefer comment on that, but these are the basis for the change in not operating without a diverse or culturally responsive workforce. If you have questions there, Matt Tiefer will answer in regard to HR. Superintendent will not allow unsatisfactory employee performance to go unidentified. That's number 3. There weren't very many changes there. In wording, the board suggested wording we changed a little bit there on that one, but on number 4 was also without mental health services. So we looked at counselors and what entry counselor ratio presently is to what we would like the ratio to work towards during that time frame. And we did start this with this year, although the other goals are extended. It was because we did not have the data for this present year, but on this one, we did have the data for the present year. So we went ahead and left this one as 2020 to 2025. And then of course, the superintendent will increase community partnerships, and it was the number of students served with a school partnership. Some of those are still being counted and verified with the number of students who have access to those. So those student numbers we will get, but we reworded it in a way that made sense in regard to students whom have access. So those were the changes based off of the feedback from our last meeting. And we'll turn it back over to you, Madam President. Thank you.
Thank you. So right now, just as, kind of an opener, a kickoff, we've got our draft goals and we have our draft guardrails, and the intent is to, at tonight's meeting, to adopt them as draft so that we can go out and have the conversation with the broader community. And so go ahead and I can kick it off to questions or comments. Again, just a reminder to Board Member Mitchell, who is present in the boardroom, as well as Member Bellamy. I can't see hands very well. And so I'm hoping you guys can join by Zoom or find another way to give me a heads up to get you in the queue. I do see Member Marsette's hand raised at this time, so I will kick it off to you. And also for the record, you are the chair of our Strategic Planning Ad Hoc Committee. And so if there are any updates on timelines or anything you wanted to share, you can obviously do that as well.
Actually, I'd like to hear a little bit from Matt Tieford on our guardrail, the number 2, just to talk about maybe what, what some of this would look like possibly that we have listed underneath there.
Absolutely. Through the president to Member Marcette and to Matt Tieford. Is he logged on?
Yes, I'm here.
There you go. Thank you.
Thank you, through the president, Member Marcette. I can speak a little bit about those responses under, or those guidelines under number 2. It might be helpful to the board if we could scroll up to that. Thank you. So the effort here is just to capture some of the work that's already occurring in the talent management area. And you'll note that really it's an interdepartmental effort in the sense that there are talent efforts led through the Office of Recruitment and Retention, the coordinator in that office, but also coordinating with the Office of Equity and Compliance, Sonia Hunt and her team. And of course, in regard to teaching positions in particular, working with the Academic Services Unit to identify where those needs are and what efforts are currently in place. As an example, over the years, as you may be aware, there have been ongoing efforts with varying partner universities to develop what are commonly referred to as grow your own programs. There's currently one led by the Talent Management Department that partners with local graduates from education programs to provide a pipeline for them to join ASD's workforce after they've graduated from university. So that's one example. But you see listed there other ways, recruitment and retention plan, we can enhance our diversity hire efforts, again, led by that retention and recruitment coordinator, Amanda Graham.
So don't we have an employee referral program, or is this something different?
The idea, to your question, the idea is to target that effort to whatever diversity efforts coordinated out of that office happen to be at that time. So you're correct that there are referral efforts already in place in district practice, but this would be specific to targeted areas for recruitment of recent graduates from partner universities that we establish relationships with or already have relationships with.
Okay. And then I just had one other comment, and it was actually, where is it? In our other guardrail on mental health without superintendent, number 4, basically. So by 2025, we want to increase one counselor right now is 566, or it's one counselor per 566 students. And in 5 years, we want to get to one counselor for 450 students. Can we do better than that in 5 years? Or is that, I always have high goals and aspirations, but I just wanted to question that and find out why, what was the reason that the district felt that this was a good attainable number of where we could go?
At this point, it is a start. The movement for this and the cost for this would be about $1 million.
Right, I know.
So say the board, we can increase this, but then identifying where funds would be taken is the other opposite. And we did have some work this year in reprioritizing efforts and reprioritizing divisions and programs unsuccessfully.
Right. Okay. Well, that's just a reminder to the board that when we look at these goals and these guardrails, we have to put our money where we say our priorities are. And so I want to make sure the board's aware that what we're looking at today is what we're going to be looking at when we start talking about the budget. These are our priorities. And I just had, oh, okay. I was like, I'm trying to read this without my glasses. And yeah, so I thought it said 3.86, but it's 53. So that's a lot better. I was looking at the interim guardrails for grades 9 through 10, obtaining a GPA of 2.8 or higher will increase from, and 53 is a lot better than what I thought it said, but thank you.
Thank you. Next up in the queue is Member Holloman.
I was just going to say, when we message this, I think we need to emphasize a lot that we are looking long-term. You know, when it comes up for a vote, when we're talking about it, I think the reaction of a lot of people is going to be along the lines of, you don't even have kids in school yet. What are you talking about? But that we are looking years out, that we do see this year as an anomaly and an interruption, that we still have the same kind of long-term goals that we had. Of course, the future of what instruction looks like and everything is going to be tough, and that we don't know how long or how short all this is going to be. But I do think if we don't explain that to the public, they'll be mystified by some of these numbers and wonder what we're thinking.
Thank you. Next up in the queue, I have Board Member Hildy.
Thank you. So when it goes out to the public, will it be for the goals, the 3 goals? My concern is the interim goals are a little confusing for just messaging and communicating what that is, and those will change a little bit each year. So what does it look like? And I guess my bigger concern is on number 3, that it is so complex that it makes you almost forget what the goal is. So what is the step after tonight's approval? What will be shared? Will it be the goals or the interim goals as well?
Madam President, may I?
Yes, please.
Thank you. That's actually a really great question. And when I did look into what's happened in the past, it was the Destination 2020. Those were the board goals were what was published. So those major statements in regard to those 6 areas was published, and the interim goals, we didn't call them interim goals at the time. We had our actions that we took here at the district. We published those on our website, but they were not what went out. In fact, they are revised each year. And to let you know that when there's a district goal, then each building would take this information and layer it on top of their own building and their own data to set even smaller interim goals at their building level. Then a grade level could do it. So my suggestion would be that the items for which the board has said go out for that very reason, not to confuse, but that these would be listed underneath each of those goals if somebody really wanted to investigate and understand it. Very similarly to how we have our actions listed this year under Destination 2020.
Thank you. Next up in the queue, Board Member Mitchell.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I just, so some of my questions have more to do with the action items under the goals. But one question I have is on the goals for the 3rd through 9th grade math. Rather than looking at each year individually, we're just 5 years or 6 years, 7 years, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. Is that correct?
Well, our target is, we will look at them every year. We'll actually look at them every time that they're presented, but in the board and evaluation of those would be over that distance time in reaching that goal.
So the 40.59% is just the average of what the 3rd grade average is right now, the 4th grade average. We took all 7 years and averaged those averages.
We took the percentage of, well, actually I'll have Mark Stock, his team filled those in regard to map growth. On which specific one?
If you look under that board goal of number 2, and it says possible interim goals, it says that currently the percentage of grade 3 through 9 students on track to be proficient in math on the state summative assessment currently peaks as measured by the interim assessment currently MAP growth will increase from 40.59% in fall 2019. So that 40.59% took the average for each of our
That is correct.
7 grades and
Overall.
averaged all of those.
Correct. That's
Okay.
grades 3 through 9.
And
for-
it's technically looking at 1 year because we didn't have, we're looking at the time over COVID. So it just goes to fall 2021.
Okay. And obviously to make that number change, you're looking at each grade and each school and you're disaggregating that.
Correct.
Okay. And then on number 3, the life, college, career ready, as I was looking through that again, it just hit me that the life ready really, everybody needs to have those characteristics, right? They all need to have grit, perseverance. They have to have the self-awareness, the self-management, social awareness, social management to be successful in life. So I kind of feel like that's a subset of college ready and career ready. And I don't know if we can make that explicit.
That's
or-
actually how it's listed. So everyone is life ready, and then you are either college or career ready.
Okay.
College and career.
So I wonder if we just want to add means all students leave high school, just to make that really explicit. I don't know. It might just be me being, you know. And then the other question about that is, it talks about the percentage of students who are taking the financial literacy class. And it kind of makes it sound like we have that available everywhere now, which I think is not the case. Is that true? Some high schools offer it, some don't, or am I
That's
mistaken?
correct.
Okay. Okay.
And that's why those notes are on there from secondary to either ensure that, so the notes under there of how we're going to address that are specifically placed there for that reason.
Okay, I'm not sure exactly which.
If you keep scrolling up. Keep going. Oh, sorry, down. You want to go under, so just lift it up. I was thinking I was doing this with my finger. So right there, keep going where it talks about secondary students. Yeah. And so we couldn't get a baseline. And so we're
Oh, I
going
see.
to-
Okay. Yeah, I think, you know, I was looking at this in board docs and that wasn't in there. So that's, well, I don't know. Anyway, I didn't see that. Somehow I missed those comments there. Thank you. And then on the guardrails, do all lottery schools have neighborhood boundaries?
No, not all lottery places have neighborhood boundaries, but they all are located in neighborhoods.
So for those that don't necessarily currently have neighborhood boundaries, we'll create some for them. Okay, I was just curious about that. Let's see. And I guess, you know, I still feel like something that's missing in the guardrails, and I'm a broken record, is just something about employee satisfaction, or feeling like, you know, just having, in order to have our school district as successful as it can be, we need to have employees who feel like they have a voice in the system. And we've talked about this a lot. And I know that, you know, your perspective is that through strong building leadership and through bringing things to their principals, that people within schools do have a voice. But I still think that we need something in there kind of to supplement or to represent the community value that we focus on retaining teachers. I think it would be good to have some kind of measure in there that we can over time that says, you know, we're on par with other school districts like us, or it's improving or getting better, or not, or deteriorating a little bit from year to year. I think it would be good to have some type of a measure in here.
So I'm
Through
gonna go
the
ahead.
president to Member Mitchell. Actually, there's actually more ways in which employees are engaged, and some of those are outlined within the negotiated agreement as well. So it isn't simply just being involved at their school level. There are district-wide committees, district-wide programs, and that is, we work directly with union leadership to involve that. So there isn't just one way, but I would agree that feeling supported is important.
And I guess my point that, you know, I mean, everybody on the board has heard me talk about this for 2 years, is that it would be good to have some kind of objective way to assess that from year to year. So that's all I'm saying to the board, is that it would be good to have something around that, but we've
Matt
talked
T-
about it, and I don't think other board members have the same desire.
Yeah, that's a great. Matt Tieford said he could speak to the employee engagement in regard to the contract, if you'd like.
We'll go ahead and let him weigh in with his comments, and then I'm going to move on to 3 other board members in the queue.
Thank you, through the president, to Member Mitchell. Thanks for your question. In the HR division and talent management specifically, we have a number of programs implemented. You're familiar with the mentorship program, which is primarily focused on AEA members, teachers. That has been a successful program, as has the Building Induction Liaison program, also provided for through a grant in collaboration with AEA. And finally, wanted to mention, we're in final negotiations to implement an employee engagement tool, which is an online tool called Glint, which will provide opportunity for all employees to provide real-time feedback with respect to their engagement along a number of different questions and topics that we have ownership of in terms of programming whatever areas we have interest in engaging that engagement about.
Thank you.
And Dr. Stock has one more in regard to his work with employee engagement.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Bishop. Just wanted to remind everybody, it's kind of gotten lost in all the chaos over the last year, but every year we do those panorama surveys for employees' satisfaction and how they feel about leadership in their schools, how they feel about the district. And then we track all those. And I think it was a year and a half ago, maybe I reported to this board about the employees' rate of satisfaction. I think it was the highest it had been in 3 years, but that's been about a year now since we've done that. I just want to let you know that we have some of that data and we do track it.
Outstanding. Thank you. Next up in the queue is Board Member Bellamy.
Thank you. So I have a couple of questions for Mr. Tieford on Guardrail 2. I think I'm glad to see the culturally responsive training by 2023, because I think that's something that we just have to continue to do. Are we still collaborating, Mr. Tieford, with, or Ms. Hunt? Are we still collaborating with the state and the recruiting? Is it ATP? Do we have any relationship with ATP at all in their to help with our recruiting? I don't know. Is Matt here?
I am.
You're on there.
Through the
Yes.
president, Member Bellamy, I would need to check with Peggy Rankin, who's the Senior Director of Talent Management. I don't know the current status of that relationship, so I would need to check with her. But I do know that the person on point in talent is Amanda Graham, our recruitment and retention coordinator, who spearheads all of those efforts and has developed and is still developing components of our diversity recruitment plan within the broader scope of the recruitment plan.
Okay. And so my other two questions really have to do with how diverse are we? Do we have data? I mean, do we have it? I mean, where do I look at? I think one of the things that I struggle with is, you know, when hiring supervisors have the opportunity to hire, they're only limited to what's in the queue, what's in the database. And so the more diverse candidates we get into the database, I think the more successful we're going to be. So how diverse are we? And how do we know, besides teachers and administrators, how do we know how to target our diversity efforts? How are we doing that?
I'll begin with a response to that question, and Ms. Hunt may want to add to that through the president to Member Bellamy. As you know, we do track on an annual basis demographic data for employees through the EEO5 data gathering and reporting process. So we have current numbers. Typically that report is forwarded to the superintendent in the fall and to the board in the early months of the year. I believe Ms. Hunt has the most recent data there, so she can answer the question with respect to current demographic numbers. As to the question about recruitment efforts and improving those efforts, again, I've directed the talent management department to look at current practice with respect to our recruitment plan to ensure that we, in line with this guardrail and the board goal, enhance those efforts to reach out to partner universities and establish new partnerships with universities who may serve populations where we've identified a need to attempt to grow interest in those communities, so that we do, to your point, have a robust applicant pool that's diverse. And I think there are other measures we can take as well to ensure that those names and those applications are forwarded to hiring managers, so that we have a diverse pool of applicants for consideration at hiring time.
Thank you.
To the president, to the board, to the president, to the board, to Member Bellamy, to your question, is just from off the top of my head, from 2017 to 2018 school year to last school year. In terms of the ADA bargaining agreement, we are 16% underrepresented representation. Thank you. Can you hear me better now? Okay, awesome.
That's better.
We're at, we moved from 15% to 16% from the 2017 to 2018 school year to the 2019 to 2020 school year for the AEA bargaining agreement. For APA, we moved from, within those 3 years, from 25% to 26% representation. We know that there's more, I can't quote exactly the percentage on those non-certified positions. We know that there are some existing barriers, to include no longer having an undergraduate program at the College of Education at UAA. We are shoring up efforts through Grow Our Own initiative, starting at Bartlett High School. And, but it'll be like 7 years before we see some results in that regard. So we are taking a look at partnering with several universities, and to include historically Black colleges and universities. We have been just in talks about a strategy around some recruitment so that it's fruitful in that regard, and looking through recruitment through different faith institutions to engage, for example, the Polynesian community, to ensure that we do have diverse staff, particularly in certified positions. So there are talks, those are the barriers, and those are the numbers.
Okay, thank you. And if I may, before you go, just to, so the recruitment, the diversity recruitment communications plan, so where will the strategies be? They'll be in a plan that you're going to create?
No, that's really, it's in collaboration with
okay.
HR and the Office of Equity and Compliance.
Okay.
And that's what we've been in talks with so far. I will say that COVID has been a delay. It's given us some delay, but we are still looking at it in terms of innovative ways to engage various communities that being a teacher or being an education leader is in the pathways. There's a pathways created. Like I said, I mentioned earlier, the Grow Your Own is a great initiative with a long secondary education and CTAE. We just want to make sure with Missy Fraze and with Dr. Kirsten Johnson, we just know that it's, and with Sean Prince from Bartlett High School, but it's 7 years down the pipeline. But we are starting it to make sure that the children are, or we have people in the pipeline. It's just going to take some time.
Great. And so one of the things I think I'd like to see is at least one of the bullets, creating pathways to, because we potentially could have administrative assistants who have a degree that are already committed to us that just need a pathway to teaching. So so I'm just thinking, based on what you just shared, perhaps we could add a bullet that, or maybe that could be in the plan, creating paths to teaching.
May I speak to that or?
Yeah, well, actually, these guardrails are just action, so we'll take them back to the team with
Yeah.
your suggestion, and then if they fit in there, then we'll bring those back. But the interim goals are the work of these
Right.
folks. So we'll
So-
take that back and consider it.
It's just a suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up in the queue is Member Marset.
And actually, I'm going to let Andy go first, if you don't mind.
Okay, Member Holloman.
Sure. Touching back on 2 points, and one is kind of the disposition of the workforce, but also retention and being able to draw the population we want into the district. A lot of it is local, but a lot of it's bigger. We're seeing national trends. We're seeing trends in the state as well as trends in the city. Around the early 2000s was when a lot of people that I worked with at the time, just in casual conversation, would come up and they'd kind of look at each other and say, my kid's in high school and they're starting to talk about education, and I don't think I would tell them to pursue this. And it was always said kind of haltingly and with a lot of sadness, because the 80s and 90s, if you were a teaching couple in Anchorage, and it turns out a whole lot of teachers are married to each other, we don't seem to interact that well with the general population, you could develop a pretty nice lifestyle. And you had a certain level of security, you had a reasonable amount of funds to live on, and you had some time in the summer to do some things that were pretty fantastic. A lot of it has been eroded, especially with the change in the retirement program. And then there's some hidden things in the change in retirement that deal with disability and some other protections that are gone as well. So we kind of have a steep hill there that has a number of things in it that I think at some point we as a board and other boards are going to have to look at and say, if we're really going to solve these issues, we're going to have to lean into the state to look at what traditionally drew people in. The lead up is that we used to have things like Future Teachers of America, like clubs in high schools. There is one out in the Mat-Su. It's not in the Palmer-Wasilla area. It's out towards Glen Helen. And I say this because when a teacher kind of advertised it on Facebook, there were a lot of people going, "Oh wow, you've got one? you have some kids that say they want to be teachers." It's not very common anymore. And a lot of teachers are reluctant to recommend it. They're going to be reluctant to recommend it to any of their students, and not just some of the students that represent backgrounds that we need to recruit into the profession. You have to feel okay about it, and you have to feel like you're giving someone good advice before you suggest to them that they commit their lives to a particular profession. And right now, and for the past 10 years or so, it hasn't been there. And that's having a pretty profound effect all on its own. The other thing that I think this district could do that I think would be helpful, that a lot of times we wonder why they don't, is an effective exit interview. We've talked about it at the Anchorage Education Association. The issue for them is always kind of around the lines of like, well, now you're talking to people that aren't members anymore. And AEA doesn't actually have anything to do with selecting who are members. So it never directly impacted them a lot. As long as the district was staffed, they were going to have members. But it seems like it would matter a lot to the district. And the thing that differentiates an exit interview from the general surveys is, one, you really do tend, I think, to get a little spotlight on the cracks in your system, and get more accurate information, because these are people that have chosen to leave for some reason. A lot of times it's nothing that's the fault of the district. prime example, military spouses or spouses of oil company executives that are here for 4 or 5 or 6 years and leave again. They can be wonderful, maybe they're not wonderful, the district can be wonderful, but the truth is when their spouse gets transferred, they're gonna leave no matter what. On the other hand, there are times when it absolutely is an issue with the district, and a collection of exit interviews would help spotlight, I think, where we might have some things that are driving people out of the ASD, and sometimes maybe out of the profession itself. It's not free. I mean, it takes time. Someone has to do the interviews and somebody has to compile the results and look at them. I don't know if that's something we can afford to do, but it seems like it would be illuminating. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up in the queue, Member Marset.
Thank you. I just wanted to state too, and I want the community to know that what we're looking at in our work session and what we're going to be looking at that we're going to be voting on is not accepting these, but just the approval of the drafts, because in our timeline, we still want to go back out to the community and get input from them on these drafts. If there are any changes made based on that community input or not, but they won't be adopted until we actually have that review by the community. And so I just wanted individuals to know that, not thinking that we're approving these tonight, but that we're approving the drafts so that we can move forward to present it to the community.
Thank you for that clarification, because that is important. We do want everybody to understand that. And so Star, did you have one more thing? Oh, there. Okay, hand went away.
Actually, I do have one more thing.
Okay, go ahead.
Don't we have exit interviews now? I mean, I've heard people say they do exit interviews, and I don't, and it's a choice whether they do it or not. But I don't know. So I have a question.
Through the president to Member Marset, may I have permission to put Matt Tieford back on and he can respond to that?
Of course.
All right.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop. Through the president to Member Marset. Yes, you're correct. We do an exit interview process. In fact, just amended the process. Might lose track of my years here. It was either end of last school year or the year before. You're correct. It's a voluntary process, but each retiring employee has an opportunity is prompted to respond via email to an exit interview, and we do then capture those responses for various purposes, not the least of which, to Member Holland's point, is to create some understanding as to the reasons for the person who's left employment. We also capture some of that data on what's known as a notice of resignation form, also captures through various fields that are marked by the employee as to their reasons. So we do have a couple of different ways that we can capture that data. Always opportunities to improve, and which was the reason for that effort, as I mentioned recently, to improve that process. So we appreciate the feedback, and we'll continue to work toward a better exit interview process.
And I don't see other hands raised. Can I make one more question?
Yes.
On our Grow Your Own, didn't we start that at Bartlett last year? And I know it's probably been interrupted, but are we continuing it through our online, or how is that working? Or is that a standstill?
Through the president, yes, we did start it, and it continues to be a course.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Wonderful. So at this time, I'm not seeing any other hands up in the queue, and I know that we do have another topic that we want to dive into over this next hour. And so this is, like I said earlier, this is going to come up as an action item tonight for us to vote on, so that we can hopefully formally accept these as a draft and go out into our community and get some more extensive feedback on this over the next month and a half or so. So at this time, we'll go ahead and move on to the next item in our agenda, which is an SRO discussion. So just wanted to remind board members, a few months ago, we had a listening session for the community to, at that time, call in and give us testimony on, some of their thoughts and feedback on SROs. And this is our time and our opportunity to, ask questions and learn the other way. I don't know if our awesome IT folks can maybe swivel the camera the other way so we can see who all is in the room there. I believe there are several folks, and yep, there we go. They can help answer questions for us, as well as we have plenty of members from Dr. Bishop and her administrative team that can help us find answers, or to the best of our ability. Dr. Bishop, did you want to make any introductory comments or introductions or anything like that before we kick this off?
Thank you, Madam President. This time I'd like Dr. Johnson, if you would like to maybe come up to a closer table. You don't have to stand, but may I request Dr. Johnson, she works with the secondary directly interfacing with the SRO program to actually lead the discussion on our end if there's questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop, through the president to the board. We have a number of our SROs here today, so they could also ask or answer questions directly. Sergeant Reynolds is probably the point person, I would guess, if you have direct questions to them. But I just wanted to start by saying that the SROs are an extremely valuable resource to us in our schools. I've been in the district since before SROs were present, and they were brought in for a number of issues that we were dealing with within our high schools. And since that time, their job has morphed and changed, and they really have become a part of our school system, and are an extreme asset to a lot of our staff and students. And so with that, I just kind of wanted to give you a picture of some of the work that they do on a regular basis. Just as a kind of a starting point for the discussion, and then we can kind of go from there. But some of the things that you see very readily are obviously dealing with crimes that happen in schools. I think that's a pretty obvious one, but there's a lot of things that they do that are not that in terms of outreach to kids, and a lot of those things involve safety planning for schools in a variety of different ways, outreach to families. They do wellness checks on kids often. They definitely help with proactive education in our classrooms and proactive supervision in our hallways, and are making connections with kids that way as well. So there's just a lot of things that are off the books that we don't necessarily see in our data that they do on their own as a part of their job and as an asset to our school staff and our kids in our schools. So I just wanted to start with that, and then if there's questions or a particular direction the board would like to go, I'm happy to do that.
And thank you. And interestingly enough, I would add one thing. I had a conversation when we were at home actually last spring with the sergeant, and I asked him, now that we're not in school, what are you doing? And he said exactly what we do in school. We just do welfare checks on families. And as parents would call in and with needing some help, we were lucky that the Anchorage Police Department had SROs to actually, when we're in our homes learning, that they had our SROs go to those homes. Because certainly some of the supports needed in school by teachers were the same supports needed at home with parents. And I just want to say that kids being home, a lot are not in homes that would be loving and caring. And I am thankful every day while kids are at home right now that we have our SROs to do that work. Because sometimes school has been the only joy in students' lives to come to the school building. So I just want to thank you.
Thank you. First up in the queue, I have Member Marcette.
Thank you. So first of all, because I read the National School Board Association's recommendations that they made as far as funding and such for training for SROs. But what I was wondering about is And first of all, I think our SROs, I've talked to many principals, I've talked to many families. They're very appreciative of them being in the schools. I was told that before they were in the schools, that we used to have certain people driving through our parking lots at our high schools looking for students, either for drugs or to beat them up or whatever. And since that time, I know that our students feel safer, our staff feels safer. So not to say that that wouldn't happen if they went away, that those people would come back. But I do think they serve a valuable service. But I do have some questions based on the National School Board Association, and one of them is training. And I know that officers go through a lot of training, and maybe it's not through ASD, but maybe they could talk a little bit about the training and what training they do get, sensitivity, cultural, I don't know, because I don't know what kind of training they get. But I think that would be helpful if we had someone that could just talk about what is the training they receive, and if it's not specific to schools, what training do they get that does work in our schools, that helps them in our schools.
Sure. Through the president, Dr. Bishop, if you don't mind, I would like to invite Sergeant Reynolds to help me out with some of the training that the SROs do, but we do involve our SROs in a number of trainings in-house in our district, but I'll turn it over to him first to talk about his specific training.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. My name is Sergeant Reynolds. I am a school resource officer supervisor. Just want to introduce who we have in the room real quick with me. We have Lieutenant Roberts. He's the SRO commander for our SRO program. And then we have our Diamond High SRO, Rich Sargent over there, one of our West High School SROs, Matt Fraze, and then our East High School SRO, Will Perry. And then over here to my left, we have one of our Bartlett school resource officers, Officer Ben Yoon. I just want to thank you for having us here today, the opportunity to speak on behalf of the SRO program. As far as training goes, all of our school resource officers attend the National Association of School Resource Officers training. We actually had them come up in the past. ASD and AAPD have sent our SROs out to the training outside of Alaska. But this last summer, we had the NASRO come up and trained all of our SROs in one room at one time. During that training, we go over all kinds of things. I think there's a huge misconception out there. There's kind of a difference between law-based policing and school resource officers. And that training really is the first opportunity for an Anchorage police officer to really grasp and get a handle on the difference between policing as a patrol officer on the street and really taking on that community policing aspect of it. During our time in the NASRO training and when we're training to become the school resource officers, it even starts before the training begins in our selection process. We're really looking for officers who want to be engaged with our student populations and within our schools. And we have a selection process that they go through, and they put their name in for that selection process. And then they go through a written test. They go through an oral board, and where they're asked questions. And we can really see the passion come out in these officers during their oral board questions when they come to us and they want this position. I think that's very different than in other police departments where officers are just assigned to the SRO program. We're getting officers that really want to be a part of community policing and really engage and be advocates for students. So that part is something that's really that I really appreciate about the Anchorage Police Department and our relationship with the Anchorage School District. That we have officers that are passionate about being role models and being engaged with our students. And that's part of the training that they go into the NASRO. But as far as during our NASRO program, officers are also learning how to teach in classroom settings, learning classroom techniques, and they're learning about how to engage the students and they take time to where they have to put a lesson plan together, and there's different curriculums they look at. And we're really looking at different programs where the one that we really like to concentrate on, because we have a lot of issues here in Anchorage, is cyberbullying and social media. So our officers are trained in that area, and they're able to go into the classrooms, and now we're doing it virtually. But I know Officer Perry here at East High recently did a class online and engaged the students at East High School. So they're learning those things. But as far as cultural awareness, yes, not only the Anchorage Police Department's Academy deals with cultural awareness, and then the NASRA program goes in a little deeper with cultural awareness and then implicit bias training. So our officers have been through that. The other things that we go through training, we're constantly adding training to the officers, and we do work with ASD during the summer months. The officers come into the Anchorage School District building here, and we worked with the counselors, and I know Diane Lemon, who's no longer here anymore, but she put the officers through training there. I could go. Is that good for now?
Oh, thank you. I think a lot of people don't know or didn't know the extensive training that you guys do go through. And I thought it was very important to highlight that. Thank you so much for explaining that to us and enlightening us.
And Member Marset, the other thing I was just going to add, Sergeant Reynolds referenced it. We do nonviolent crisis intervention training. That's something that we invite our SROs to, as well as, and the training that Officer Reynolds was talking about was our mental health first aid. A number of the issues that our SROs definitely help us with are kids who are in a mental health crisis of some sort. And if you recall, as a board, we briefed you a couple of different times around our mental health first aid training that we engaged all of our secondary staff with in the last couple of years. That's something that our SROs have been through as well. So there's fairly extensive training for our school resource officers.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next up in the queue, I have Board Member Bellamy.
Thank you. So my questions don't have anything to do with the training and the value of SROs. My questions are really focused on the impact of the SROs in this current climate to our students. Now, they're not in school right now, so it gives us an opportunity to don't think about this as adults and what we intend, but to think about this as, despite what we intend, what is the impact to kids? When you tell me you send an SRO on a wellness check, that concerns me, because we don't really know how. I would rather a counselor or social worker go on a wellness check. So of the number of kids, do we have any data that tells us how many kids have been arrested at school, for instance? And then what happens to those kids? Do they come back to school? Do they graduate? What happens to them? Because we are exposing kids at younger and younger ages to a police presence. Hey, I taught my kids to respect police. If you need help, you call the police. But I also taught them, but I also had to be real with them to let them know that if this happens, then you need to be quiet and just call me. All right? So it's not about the qualifications. Believe me, I have relied on SROs to help me as a principal. I understand that their intent is admirable, and what they bring is admirable. My concern is, what is the impact? We're not asking the right questions. We're not. So what happens to a kid? Let's just start with the data. What does the data tell us about the arrest at school and the impact on kids? Do we have anything to give us an insight into what that is like for families and kids?
I'll start with the reason why wellness check. A lot of these are reports to the Office of Children's Services. And when there is harm to children, it is a requirement to call the police department as well, new ordinance. And so or law actually, that we have to follow through with that. We saw that coming. It was a couple of weeks ago, they had spoken to that. We were all set up for that. But when we make a report of harm to a child, especially whether it's sexual harassment, things like that, it is actually that requirement. So that is made, and those are the welfare checks for which I'm referring, that are absolutely mandatory. And in that case, because of the delicate nature of the circumstances, I am thankful that our officers who are trained with children in those circumstances actually make those calls. Again, it's in conjunction with state requirements and local requirements that we do that as well. So that's one. Certainly the impact of students, we can gather that. As you said, students are not present. I believe that the student governments have spoken on this, and we can ask them for representation from their schools. We can look at however we want to gather those data. We can certainly do that, but that might be a time when we would have to either look back or wait to the future due to students actually not being present. But to answer your first and second question, and maybe Dr. Johnson has some more information about what we could look at about the impact. But as stated this summer, students aren't in school, and the decision of SROs should involve them. And that was my primary statement this summer. And I stand by it, that they should be involved. Similar to you, they should say, how does this affect me? And what do I think about this in my school? And consequently, it's difficult for us to do that right now because of COVID.
I'll wait. Go on. Thank you. If there are no more questions there are, sorry.
Oh, I've got a few more hands in the queue. Next up is Board Member Holloman.
I was just going to say one other aspect of the program is that schools tend to have a single point of contact. They have their officer that they have worked with on other issues, that's in and out of the building frequently. And the huge advantage to this is the ability to involve law enforcement less formally, to ask an officer if they're willing to speak to a kid, or ask a kid if they're willing to speak to an officer prior to something getting so serious that you don't have a choice. If you're aware of a student breaking a law, you, as the superintendent just indicated, you have to call 911, or you have to have an officer dispatch. But if you have a sense that something just isn't like you might hope it would be, the ability to know how a particular officer interacts with kids, as opposed to calling dispatch and getting the next officer who may be in the middle of a very stressful day or may not deal with teenagers as often. There's just an unknown there that makes you hesitate to engage them or get that student to engage them. But when you understand how the SRO in your building works, and you have some idea how they're going to approach a kid and how they're going to talk to them, then it opens up the possibility for that interaction to happen when we're not in a crisis, which just has a much greater possibility of positive outcomes for everybody, for the kids, for the officers, for the school, etc. So to me, this is a tense time as far as officers in our school and around kids. I do think it's an opportunity to diffuse, unless we have real evidence that we're causing a lot of stress to kids. I hope the goal is that we keep on it, and we try to find ways to engage students and law enforcement in ways that diffuse tension going forward. And if they're not in our schools, and if it's not a particular officer in our school on a regular basis, we don't have nearly as much opportunity to do that. So I think there are huge benefits here, and we just need to make sure when school's back in session that we're making good use of them.
Thank you. Next up in the queue is Board Member Mitchell.
Am I on now? Okay. So thank you for being here tonight. I really appreciate that this afternoon. I don't think anybody has, at least I don't. I've spent time in the high schools, hanging out when the SROs have been there, interacting with students. I have chatted with SROs in the summer on the trails when they've been doing their bike duty. I watched a little bit when the training was up here last summer, and there were a bunch of SROs from around the country on bikes doing some of that training here at the Ed Center. I don't think anybody has any doubt that you guys really enjoy connecting with the students, that you have a lot of training, that your intentions are very, very good. And I know from my children that there have been situations that have absolutely been diffused by SROs. I understand gang activity is tremendously. I know there have been situations where students have come to the SROs and said, you know, I know you, I want to let you know what really happened last weekend at this party and who was responsible for whatever happened there. I don't think there's any doubt that we all appreciate all of the good things. To what Member Bellamy was saying, it really is about those kids for whom, and this is no fault of yours, for whom a police officer is a threat. They've never had anything good come of a police officer being present in their home. They've seen their parents taken off by police officers. And it's you know, I think it's hard for us to imagine. For me, a police officer has never been a threat. But as I said in another meeting, I still am on alert when I'm driving my car and there's a police car nearby. So I'm a law-abiding citizen. I generally don't, you know, drive causing moving violations. And yet I still notice that I'm a little more tense. And if that happens to some of our students, that's not a good thing. So I have seen you guys in action. I know that you do really wonderful work. Much of what you're doing, the nonviolent techniques that you've learned and de-escalation, all of those things are fantastic. They go along with restorative justice. And I know you guys have training in that area as well. But much of what we have heard that you guys do are also functions that a social worker or a trained counselor or adolescent psychologist also effectively can do. And they, you know, as much training as you guys have, they have much deeper training in those areas. So I don't necessarily think it's an all or nothing. I very, very much value and appreciate everything that you guys do, and the passion and the real care and concern that you bring to your jobs and the relationships you build with students. I think to Member Bellamy's comments, we just need to understand potential impact on some of our students of having you in the buildings, because our number one concern is making kids feel safe. And for many kids, having you in the buildings might make them feel safer. And for some, it might make them, you know, trigger so much trauma that they just aren't really open to learning. So I think it's just something we need to assess and understand.
Thank you. Next up in the queue is Board Member Hildy.
Thank you. I agree with the student input part that Margot mentioned. So I think that's an important piece of data to collect. But I do want to couch that as it's just one piece of data. The students don't know what school felt like before you had SROs. And certainly gang violence or increased violence at school would make children feel differently and view SROs differently. So I support getting better data, but how we talk about data generally is that it makes us ask the next question. So as a first question, I think that's good. And I agree with Member Holloman on the benefits of being able to directly impact that when we do have somebody assigned, when we talk about relationships over and over again, and that you can influence improvement when you have that connection to a specific school. So I'm okay if we, you know, wait and hear to how we could get more student input, and then kind of take a next step after that, just, you know, as next.
All right. Before I go on to the next board member, I'm going to take a minute to ask my 2 questions real quick. The first one is, I don't know if maybe Officer Reynolds or somebody from that side might be able to answer it. My understanding is we have 2 officers per high school, and it kind of filters down into an area with a middle school and some elementary schools. And my question would be, on an average, say month or week, however time frame you want to utilize, how much time do you spend at each of the different levels, or is most of it spent at the high school levels? How often do you get out into the rest of maybe an assigned district?
Sure, Madam President. Thank you for that question. So our SROs we have 15 school resource officers. They are housed within our high schools. Most high schools have 2 SROs, with Eagle River having 1 and Chugiak having 1. And then we have one that splits his time between Clark Middle School and Begich Middle School. The officers will start their day out at the high school, and they'll attend to, usually they're checking in the AP, and they'll attend to any calls for service that may have happened over the night or over the weekend. The SROs are then encouraged to go in and check in with their middle schools. And then from there, with the start times of high school, middle school, and elementary school, then the officers are able to go to their elementary schools and go there. As far as a monthly breakdown, I don't have it, but if I'm looking at some of the numbers and some of the data, what it appears to be is actual calls for service. So there's 2 ways the officers will go to the school, but for calls for service, the elementary schools are looking at, and understand, we have a student population, I think, of about 48,000 students, and then a population staff of about 5,000 people. So we have 15 officers to go to those calls for services. If we didn't have school resource officers in the schools, that doesn't mean that the calls for service are going to go away at all. It just means a different officer is going to respond. But if you look at the breakdown of the school year, it looks like the elementary schools are averaging about 30 calls for service, where the school initiated the call, and we're calling the officers there for help. And then if you look at the middle schools, you're looking at about 100 calls for service. And if you look at the high schools, you're looking at anywhere, it depends on the high school, but as low as 300 up to 600. So probably an average of 450 calls for service, where they're asking the officers to come in for different things. I mean, we can go through the list of what they are, but the 2018, 2019, and I use that data because of COVID, gives us half a school year that we didn't have in-school types of calls for service. But, misconduct involving a weapon, your gun calls, 44 calls. By having the officers, the SROs, at different parts of the city, where you have them all the way from South High School all the way to Chugiak High School, it affords it and allows the officers to respond to those calls for services a lot quicker than if we were depending on the area car to show up to the school. The officers are already there. For example, medic assists. There were 63 medic assists in that school year, and those officers were able to provide first aid care and be the first emergency responder on scene. So as far as how much time do they spend? So those are just generated calls for service that would either be generated by 911, 311, or a lot of times their principal or the assistant principal would be able to most likely yell or call over to the SRO because they're so close in proximity a lot of times. I myself, as the supervisor of the unit, I get out and I go to elementary schools. I encourage our officers to get out there and read to our students and to engage our students and to build those relationships. For example, before I became a sergeant, I worked mid-shift patrol for 10 years at nighttime. Right after my shift, I adopted Tyson Elementary School, and I was their DARE officer. And I would be able to go into the classroom and teach the 5th graders. And I'd also start at kindergarten, and I'd work all the way from kindergarten to 5th grade. Mountain View was one of the areas that I worked on mid-shift, and my relationship building in the school with Tyson Elementary and then working Mountain View later at the night. There were many times when I would encounter a family and many times being Polynesian myself and interacting with the Polynesian population in Mountain View, I would be able to get through what most officers would not get through because I had that connection with the student at Tyson Elementary. So I was able to work that area. I knew the students, and then I knew the families, and I knew the parents. And there were so many times that has helped me as a patrol officer, being in that neighborhood and helping out there. So our officers are going in, and they're doing things that you wouldn't think a police officer would do. We encourage our officers, if they're passionate about playing music or playing guitar, to go into the music class and interact with those students so that we can break down those barriers. We have officers that are skilled in culinary. That's their passion outside of being a police officer, and they go into the culinary classes. And I can tell you of the culinary teachers that love when the officers come in and cook their signature dish with the students in the classroom. We have officers that are passionate about welding or passionate about bike safety. We've had Officer Yoon here, has coached at West High School after he's a school resource officer at West High. He would go and coach a team there. He was the head coach for girls flag football, correct? For girls flag football. So our SROs are part of our school communities. We live in this community. Many of us here have students that go to Anchorage School District, that go to the various schools. So we're going out there and engaging in other ways than just calls for service. So we love to get to the elementary schools as much as we can get to the elementary schools. So outside of calls for service, we're encouraging those officers to go into those schools and do things so that we can break those barriers down, so that when a student has a scary situation happening in the middle of the night, that those barriers are broke down and they'd be able to respond to the police officer in a different, maybe hopefully a more positive light.
Thank you. And then my second question, and I'm not sure if this is a Dr. Johnson or a Matt Tieford question, or maybe back to Officer Reynolds. Is there any sort of an evaluation process? I know we're partnered with APD, but you're not employed by ASD. Is there any sort of a evaluation process where if it might show that maybe there's a mismatch or something like that, it can be caught, before something bigger happens or something like that? What kind of a feedback loop is there in those positions?
So, Madam President, the first step in that process would be most likely contact with the school head principal. That would engage my department in secondary, and we would work with Sergeant Reynolds on some of those issues. Under my leadership, there has never been a situation in that regard, but there is a disciplinary process and a process through APD too, which I'll have Sergeant Reynolds talk to.
That is correct. The Anchorage Police Department's SROs are part of the APD and the part of the APD process. So as far as evaluation and any disciplinary things or anything like that, that would be handled internally through Anchorage Police, and we do that if the need arises.
Okay, thank you.
Can I also, if I might, just add that this matter actually is addressed in the MOU that exists between the Anchorage School District and the police department. So there are processes in place if there are issues, if there are complaints, either from the district towards an SRO or from an SRO, frankly, towards the district, that there are systems in place that allow for discussion and a resolution.
Thank you. Next up in the queue, Board Member Bellamy.
So I'd like to ask Dr. Johnson, so the call for service, or even, I'm sorry, is it Captain Reynolds? What?
Sergeant.
Sergeant, okay. Okay, so calls can generate from, if I heard correctly, calls for service can generate from a number of places. They don't just come from the administration at the school?
So Madam President, or through the President to Member Bellamy, there's a number of ways we engage in calls of service with our SROs. Not all of them are formal police matters. So, but I'll have Sergeant Reynolds talk a little bit about the formal data tracking piece, but then there's a lot of informal work that they do as well.
So yes, calls for service can come in many different ways. I mean, I would say the majority of the calls for service are probably coming from the AP or a school nurse. For example, when OCS is going to get involved, and our school resource officers are getting called by the school nurses for many of those things. But anybody can call for a call for service if somebody sees somebody suspicious on school grounds. And we encourage that too. But parents will call for calls for service. Students have called for calls for service. So any community member, but they come in different ways. They come in, the different avenues they come in are from 911. Anybody can call 911. That's our emergency number. And then 311 is our non-emergency number. And we get called through that. And then the other way, what the majority of these calls coming in are the principals or the school administration reaching out to the school resource officers. They're housed right there in the school. So a lot of times they walk across the hallway and engage them in that way, or they'll call them on their phone. But so as far as calls for service goes, that's though we have many different calls for service that the officers do, but it's not the officers walking through the school and creating a call for service. It's the school asking for police help.
Okay, so, oh, I'm sorry.
Did you have another question, Member Bellamy, or were you good?
Oh, so
She's responding, and then, yes.
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
I apologize, Madam President. My microphone battery died.
Okay.
So I was just going to say another, to Member Bellamy's question, another way that our SROs do engage in calls of service is really through issues that our own staff have personally. And so while those are less frequent than some of our student, call for services, just by sheer numbers of folks that are in our building, our staff do engage with our SROs as well for their own personal matters. So that's another way that they're engaged in the school community.
Okay, and so my final question just has to do with at what point, so how do we train our staff to engage with the SROs? So a brand new, I know if you're seasoned administrator, you already know how to do that, but new people, how do we help them understand when it's appropriate to call and not to call? I know if it's criminal, it's criminal, all right? And I understand that police are going to be in our buildings whether or not we want them there or not, right? I get that. But in terms of, at what point do we, how many of our schools have restorative justice practices that they try or at least try to do before they go? What is the steps that one should think about? How are we training our APs before they engage the police with our students? Except for criminal. I get the criminal part.
Sure. No, I think that's a good question. And I might ask Principal Wilson to come up because he's really versed in a lot of those steps at Wendler. So if Marcus, if you don't mind coming up, he could speak more specifically to what it looks like at his particular school site. But it really even starts before the AP. It starts all the way down at the classroom level. in terms of all of the training that's layered in a restorative justice process in our school buildings. So I'll have him speak more specifically about that school process, but in terms of AP training, they are mentored when they come into that job, and before they come into that job, there is some training that we provide before the school year starts, and then it is ongoing through mentorship. So while it's not like an XYZ kind of formula in terms of training, we do have lots of mentorship available for our APs when they're coming in new to that job, with seasoned assistant principals in that job that really know those nuances and how to make those judgment calls. So that would be our main way that we work with our assistant principals when they're new to that assistant principal role at secondary. So, but I'll turn it over to Marcus here, and he could talk more about the restorative justice piece and how that works at the school level.
Thank you.
Yeah, probably before jumping into the restorative piece, and I was just kind of just thinking about, you know, the reason we're here having this conversation, if it was just more of about the national conversation or just on a local level having this conversation. I just have to say, I'm very appreciative of the role of the SROs in our school. I could say, growing up, being a product of the Anchorage School District, and now an administrator in the Anchorage School District, we didn't have police officers in the school. So all of my interactions with police officers in the community as a youth were more for negative reasons. And that's why I say this role that they serve is very positive, because the interactions and the relationships that they're building with these students are very key. And I'll give an example of that. Is we had a young man last year who we found out later was going to commit suicide at his home. And one of the officers that's not here tonight just so happened to be on the call, but had a relationship with that student and was able to intervene and talk that student down. And I definitely know that that was based on that relationship that they had, just passing each other in the hallway and kind of joking around. And we can't underestimate the power of those simple interactions and relationships that are established by their presence in the school. So just wanted to say, you know, just even in my personal life outside of school, and this is a systemic thing, is I do a nonprofit. I try to get officers to come in and participate in those nonprofits to interact with kids in a positive way, because there's really much of that not going on in our community right now. And I'm never able to get anybody to come in and participate in those summits that we do. But like I said, it's nice to see in our schools that we already have those officers participating and just doing those positive interactions with those students. And something I always say is to test the value of something like this, you only need to ask students about how they feel about having SROs in their school. And when we do like an open forum, talking about things that aren't working in school, never once in our forums, and we have students from all cultural backgrounds, once have I, in the many years that we've been doing this, ever heard of the SROs being an issue in our school. So that's powerful testimony by not mentioning SROs as part of, you know, some of our issues that we do have to address in our school.
Marcus, would you mind talking a little bit about the restorative justice piece at Wendler?
Yeah, just kind of getting into the restorative piece. And I kind of take it back, and somebody already mentioned it. You know, I've seen the different interactions between some of our police officers that come into the building and interact with kids versus some of our SROs who are just been in the presence of school, been in the presence of kids. And it's something just like a brand new teacher. It's something that you learn. And through our interactions here, and I know we're talking about restorative practices, that's the constant approach that I see these gentlemen try to take when they're coming in. It's never about hardline consequences and things like that. It's about how we can go about it in a restorative process. You know, talking to the kids about how are we going to make things right? How can we help you make things right in this situation, versus putting all the blame and things on that child and making them feel like they're against the system versus the system helping them. So that's more of what we see in our approach that we take, not only in Wendler, but I think in a lot of our schools, when we're talking about looking at restorative practices, teaching kids, it's a lot of conversations that you have with kids, teaching them how to, the different roles that people play, how their actions affect others. So it's a lot of conversation, but it doesn't happen unless you have a relationship established. And it's always going to come back to that relationship piece. So.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, and Member Beverly, just to be more specific with numbers, almost every single one of our secondary schools right now is engaged in some sort of restorative justice practices. It's something that since I've come into the role as Senior Director of Secondary that we've really focused on. So it's that has been our prevention piece, our approach to building relationships, as Marcus mentioned, and many of our schools have what we call reset zones, which we've talked about at the board level before, where we're trying to keep kids in as much as possible before we're offering punitive measures. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up in the queue, I have Board Member Marset.
And I couldn't agree with Principal Wilson and Margot more. The key here is, I don't think it's the issue with the SORs and kids being afraid. I think it's training our staff and the restorative justice, that we take a look at suspensions rates, which they have come down. I watch them very closely, but I can tell you where they're not coming down, and they're not coming down with kids with disabilities, and they're not coming down with Hawaiian Pacificers. So I am seeing a decrease, and I do watch this very closely. I have a very invested interest in this. And so even though we are doing more, we can't stop. This is training with our teachers, with, teaching them how to deal with kids with disabilities, what is the right way. It's not getting in their face. There's just so much more training that we need to do. The other thing I would just say as an example is my grandson, who was in elementary school, 6th grade, and the principal or the staff called the police on him. And because they said they couldn't control him. Well, by the time I got there, he was throwing up in the hallway. And if there had been an SRO there that had been trained in student relationships or just had even a little bit of connection with kids, I think that could have turned out so differently. So I do appreciate our SORs, and I do think they are, I can remember when we were paying for them, and I am so thankful that we no longer have to pay for them and that they're in our schools, because with so much of our, we want to put our dollars towards our classroom. So I'm so appreciative of them being in our schools and doing the job that they do. Can we do better on our side? Of course we can. We always can. So I just want to say thank you to our SORs. And this is certainly nothing personal or anything towards you guys or the job you're doing, I believe. I think it's just a conversation that had to be had. And thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you. Next up in the queue, Board Member Donnelly.
Thank you, Madam President. I also think it's fine to gather input from our students on the role of SROs, but the actual responsibility for keeping our schools and our students safe is with us. We're the elected adults, and as such, I support the SRO program as essential to the safety of our students and our educational community. I support expanding the number of SROs to have at least one at every middle school also, because of the national threat that exists to our middle schools all over the nation, from both external and internal threats, and the value of having SROs there to protect our students. And as to the concern that some students might feel uncomfortable in the presence of police officers, I think rather than a problem, it's actually a unique opportunity for some students to interact with police officers in a very positive way that hopefully will make a positive difference both in their lives and in our community.
Thank you. Next up in the queue is Member Mitchell.
I very much appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion, so thank you for scheduling this. And I would love to, if we can get the sergeant's data, that would be wonderful. And also if we could get, Dr. Johnson, which schools have reset zones, and then which schools are not currently available, which schools have restorative practices. And I do agree with, I mean, I think that there are so many positives to this program, and in particular, like you mentioned, the opportunity to interact with police officers in a positive way and starting young and doing that is huge. But again, I don't think it's either or. I think that we would also benefit greatly if we had unlimited money, and I think there's nobody up here who doesn't agree with this, if we could have more social workers and psychology schools out.
Thank you. All right, I'm not seeing any more hands up in the queue. This has been a, Member Donnelly, under the wire. You're on mute though.
I did have a question about restorative justice. When we've discussed about this in the past, I've expressed a concern about the potential for undue pressure upon victims of crimes and victims of really bad behavior. And I was wondering, I wanted to ask what's being done to ensure they don't feel pressured at all in agreeing to restorative justice scenarios that they may not actually agree with.
Sure, through the president to Member Donnelly, this is Kirsten Johnson. There's a couple of steps that we take as school staff. One is that if it's a criminal activity, that's not something that we would typically engage right away in a restorative practice with. We would work through a different set of practices. The next piece I would offer is that students, if they do engage in restorative justice circles or discussions with other folks at the school level, parents are always notified and a part of that process. So students have parent advocacy in that endeavor.
Thank you. Member Marset, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment. Representative Guarantar has always been a big supporter of restorative justice, and they are having another bringing in individuals. I believe it's December 5th. There might be a couple of days, and it's about restorative justice in schools, actually implementing restorative justice. So anybody that's interested might want to reach out to her office and see when those dates actually are.
Thank you. Like I was saying earlier, this has been a really good discussion, and I know that the board, has had questions, all summer long, and we still have some more things that we'd like to hear more of the student voice whenever that opportunity does arise. And so this is one of those conversations that, is going to continue. But for tonight, I just want to simply say thank you to everybody in the room that came and joined the conversation, and for everything that you are doing for our students. You just can't say thank you enough for that. And so at this time, I'll go ahead and move forward in our agenda. Katie, I believe we have a couple of RFIs that needed to be prioritized. I don't know if you have the chance to put that up on the screen for board members to see. And we'll need to figure out a good Zoom way to work with board members to have the conversation where that ranks on our kind of our prioritization scale and stuff like that. And so.
Yes, Madam President, it's just taking a moment to load and I will get that projected for you.
Thank you. All right, so we've got, looks like 5 that have not been prioritized. And so we'll just take them quick one by one. The Educator Rising. Let's see, the note there says not an urgent request, but would like to see an update. I don't know, Dr. Bishop, what kind of a time frame would an update like that require?
I would have to defer to staff or confer with them as well in regard to the specifics of what the board is interested in on that. Just a brief update in the Board Connect or a work session question thing. I'm not sure. It would just depend on the ask.
Okay, so it looks like
I mean, just to make a point, anything at this point
yes.
is with the way that the school year is and moving day to day and putting out the fires all the time. I would have to just share what we wouldn't do. Because I mean, honestly, just keeping things afloat now is taking 10 to 14 hour days from people at the school as well as here.
I've got 2 board member hands up real quick, so I'll quick get their input. Member Marcette, you did have your hand raised first.
Well, I have a question. I mean, we did kind of get an update. I mean, the program started, the classes are still enrolled. I mean, on all of these, I guess I would like to know who requested them and what is the reason for their request?
Yeah, so this first one was by Member Mitchell, and she also has her hand raised up in the queue. So I'm going to assume that she's going to speak to it for a minute. So Member Mitchell.
Thank you. Your assumption was in fact correct. I'm just curious what schools it's at, how many courses are offered, how many students are in it. That's basically it. Hopefully it's something that will not take more than 2 or 3 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes to collect data on. Thank you.
Okay. Board Member Bellamy, you had your hand raised.
Not to speak on this one, just to speak on the 2 that I have on the list.
Oh, okay.
And staff did really the simple statistics and information is very simple and easy. They said we could put it in the Board Connect if you'd like, or we could speak to it at the next superintendent. Yep.
Board Connect sounds wonderful.
So that one is not at all information asked. Is not at all difficult.
Yeah, and no, and clarifying what the ask is, I think is important. So we'll update that one to be posted in Board Connect. And that is awesome. And as soon as that's done, we'll take a look at the pre-K and K services and see. Let's see, that one was Andy, did you want to speak to your request?
I believe this was answered some time ago.
Okay.
It was, we got a list of schools and approximate numbers and whatnot. So this was taken care of some time back.
Perfect. So we can remove that one. All right. And let's see. Member Mitchell, how many students with intensive needs of the children are reported as unenrolled students? Dr. Bishop, do we have a way to answer that particular question? Maybe out of finance?
You know what, we can look into it and look at Senior Director Wayne can look and see how many INs we had last year. A lot of these INs though were predicted to come because of our preschool services and due to that. So it's would just depend on whether they would be new to the district or had been here. So we'll be able to look into that. And maybe if we create that dichotomy, it'd be easier to look at because again, we're making predictions on students entering ASD as well. So
Okay.
yes, we can.
And that one,
I think
that
by
one-
next meeting, we can figure that out. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, perfect. And so then the next two, I believe both came from Member Bellamy. And this is where, if you'd like to speak to both of yours, that would be wonderful.
And I will. So the data for 2014 and 2019 was really to include to look at in terms of disproportionality in trying to draft the anti-racist or anti-racism and instructional equity policy. And I wanted that data to support where the need for that. And so that's what that was all about. It was simply looking at the data. What does the data tell us? I think we've had bits and pieces of it already. But if the board does not think they need more information to draft a policy, then I'm fine with just getting my own data. I won't include any in the policy to support the need of a policy.
Okay, and if board members can take a quick look, right, it's kind of in blue. It does say that with current workload and active requests, estimating about 3 weeks for 2 people to acquire all of the requested data, with a little bit more explanation there. And Member Marset, you have your hand raised? And you're on mute.
So I'm having a tough time reading this, sorry. So I'm not quite sure what is being asked for here. It says data for the following student groups, and I get that, but what data? And then it says to include a disparity.
In the following areas, it's listed underneath. Overall student achievement.
I can't see it. Okay, there we go.
Graduation rates. We have some of it. The superintendent has given us some of it, but there were holes. What I was trying to do was to include that as information, not just for myself, but for the board, in looking at the disproportionalities among our student groups in those areas.
But when we write and not that I don't agree with you, Margot, but when we write an equity policy, I think it's important to look at these things, but you write an equity policy based on what should happen, regardless of what these are. I would want an equity policy that says, you know, we cover all areas and our equity policy, you know, is for all, regardless of the data. I don't want to pinpoint, I mean, I could say disability, but I think it has to be an equity policy for all students.
It does, and it is. It will be.
Okay.
But
Well,
there is a
I've been reading it.
disproportionality among our students. So
No.
I think I think the data needs to drive what we do and where we go.
But I think that what we have to do is put the policy together. We can't
Oh,
direct the
absolutely.
superintendent.
If you think you want to do that without any data, then that's fine. That would not be my suggestion or my recommendation. We have, so if I did not realize it would take this long, that long for the district to come up to provide this.
Yeah.
I
No.
literally thought it was somewhere handy.
Right.
If
No,
it is not, and if it's time consuming, then I don't know what you want to do, but I think we need to know what the data tells us.
No, I agree. I agree, Margot. This is good stuff. But do we want to write? I don't know that the district can provide us with this information. I mean, I look at the data all the time on suspensions and everything else. You're right. This information isn't particularly out there. And my question is, do we want to wait to write an equity policy to get this information based on the timeline that it's going to take to get this?
So I'm going to let Dr. Bishop, who has her hand lightly raised, comment.
Thank you. Through the president, to Member Marset and Member Bellamy. There are items on here that, and very similar to what Member Mitchell asked in regard to staff surveys. They're on our website. We publish them. It's under the panorama, under the board goal. All of our data are listed under the prior board goals, so you can go there and look at staff satisfaction surveys each year. In regard to the student graduation rates, overall student achievement data, those are very accessible. Some of them under the other are actually detailed to where we don't already have a data pool. So essentially the reason why they would take longer is we would have the data, the script for the program to capture those is already created. So you're absolutely correct. I can go to student graduation rates for all of those. Our public can, and go into all by demographics or all, we can even look at male, female, whatever. But when you look at the others, the number of arrests at a school, the arrests, we have case numbers, but then the next one about who didn't graduate, who did, that's actually detailed to a student. The number of school administrators trained in restorative justice practices. We have offered those. We would go back to say, okay, what was the training and we would want to provide, this was the training, these were the people done. So a lot of those are actually very time consuming depending on what was asked. So it's not that we don't have any data. A lot of these are accessible by the board members already. And the ones that aren't are the ones that actually would take quite a bit of time, because you're not looking at programs that are already written to capture these data. We would have to rewrite it, upload, compare, and then see if those were. And then we also, before things are published, we clean it, meaning that it isn't false. Like what we're saying is actually the question we asked and programmed is actually what we're answering, because especially for our data folks that they take that very seriously. So that's why for them to really review it and look at it. But certainly,
so can I,
general is not a difficulty in some of those areas.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bishop. So the other was really other. That should have really been a whole nother request. It was in the same email, but it really should have been another request. That was not anything I was rushing to get. And for the top part though, for that data for 2014 and 2019, I just kind of like the way you guys lay it out in a chart. On a one pager or something like, that's what I was, so yes, I can go and get it, and I guess I can put it in a chart. Well, I just thought maybe it already existed and we could just grab that. So this is really two requests in one. The other, you can put it under where, I don't care where you put it, but because of the efforts that we're trying to work with governance to do a policy, I would like to have try to get the disproportionate, the other data. And I don't think that will that take 2 to 3 days or
Disproportionality on what?
no, the first part of the request, the data for the various student groups in those following areas, because that's already, we have that, right? So the disparity percentages for each, for those student groups in those areas.
Right, but
Overall student achievement. We have that, right?
What we'll have to do is, it still would take time because we're going to
Okay.
get, overall student achievement is easy, but when look at number 6 for each one of those student groups, we'd have to look at the suspension data and then the
Okay.
reason why, and then was the SRO involved? We have to also look into that then. So if there's multiple layers that are listed,
So if
that's the time consuming part of it. Those different student groups for overall student achievement, no, not difficult at all.
Okay.
But as you get further down your list, those specifics with qualifiers, each qualifier adds another
Okay.
layer.
So, all right, so I'm fine with, what can I get on the list of the 6 things that are listed? Forget other should have been its own, a separate request.
Would you like us to go back and find out what is, we can take it, Dr. Stock can take it back to the,
and I don't
team
want to
and-
cause a lot of work.
Yeah.
Really, I don't.
I mean, it is work because they're doing something else, but
Okay.
if it's needed for the policy, we want it to be informed.
Okay.
So I don't want to blow it up because the work of everyone from teachers and buildings to everyone is at all-time high.
And I can take number 6 off that list and other can go into a separate request later.
Margot, I have a chart for number 6. I follow this very closely.
Oh, you do? Okay, thank you. Then,
Member Hildy, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I'm just a little concerned on the time part of it. I'm fine helping Member Bellamy with the easy, quick stuff if she and I just want to do it together. But I'm very sensitive to the amount of time, like even 5 minutes is kind of an intense request right now. So I just want to make sure we're mindful of that.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Madam President, I would just defer to Dr. Stock to let us know tomorrow if that's okay.
That would be fine.
What they have already, look for it and gather it, because I think that is the primary ask. And then if
really-
it's more work, we'll let you know.
Absolutely, because I do not want to add more work. And that's probably, so anyway, you want me to talk on the next one? And the next one was, those questions generated from a liability assessment from a Council of Greater City Schools legal seminar that, or not a seminar, webinar that I took. And there were questions that were asked that I didn't know the answer to. And I did preface it with a simple conversation would do to answer my question, because I realized that other people may not have those questions. So I will say again, a simple conversation would work. I think I have the answer to most of them, or no. But it was a Margot interest question. It did not have anything to do with the board other than potential liabilities.
Okay, yeah, and it looks like it would take 2 weeks plus to get that kind of data. Member Hildy?
Oh, sorry. And I just want to remind us the reason we started the RFIs was, you know, I have an interest in this, and if I go over to somebody and ask them, I might take an hour of that person's time. But as a board member, it has to be a board's interest. So absolutely individual board members bring stuff forward, but the purpose of the RFIs is to say, is there interest in having administrative, I mean, really it's a spending, right? If we're taking up admin time, we're spending money. So just that there needs to be support for, and maybe there is, I don't know, but just answering some of those questions, if it's going to be more than like a 5-minute question.
Well, I think this would probably be more than a 5-minute. I mean,
Yeah.
I just wanted to have a conversation and
Dr. Bishop, did you have
understand how is the ASD handling these things. But if there is no interest among the board, I will continue to seek out my own answers. So it's fine. I'm good with not it was never my intent for anybody to do it. It was a request for a conversation. And if that is not possible, then it's not about getting anybody to do the information.
All right. So we've talked about those top three right there. I think I'm going to put a pause on the RFI conversation for the moment. We will get an answer shortly on number 1, and we'll work on 2 and 3.
I'm okay with you moving 3 since there's apparently no interest in those issues.
Can I just make a quick comment?
Sure.
Yes, Member.
Okay, yeah, I had my hand up, but I'm not sure if you saw that. So I guess I am assuming that whatever workshop you were part of, Margot, they talked about that this is something that is kind of important for board members to know about. So I think I would be interested in the answers to some of these questions, but I don't, rather than have it be an extensive analysis of all these data, maybe we could just put it on a work session and have a 15-minute conversation with, I assume it would be Mr. Tieford who would address, I don't know what department this is in, but I mean, I don't want somebody to have to spend 10 hours preparing for that 15-minute conversation, but maybe it could just, I don't know, Dr. Bishop, if you think that is productive, to not have somebody have to prepare a PowerPoint, and we could just ask questions and hear what the general approach of the district is. And then if we feel that there's a need for data to be pulled, we could ask them. Is that something that would be amenable to the administration?
I'll just take it back and maybe get some guidance from them about the easiest way to, and what they see and what were the concerns in regard to this issue.
Okay, and I guess I think I might be speaking for Margot as well. I don't want to put words in your mouth, though. Okay. You know, we wouldn't want you to go back and have them say, well, we can spend a couple of hours to prepare for that 10-minute or 15-minute discussion. I don't think we necessarily want that. It would just be a conversation starter, possibly.
Yeah, and thank you. That's a good clarity. You know, the process for the RFIs is to get the questions, see how long it would take, and that's all that we've done, and that's all that I've really received information on. So I would want to go back and then talk about just in general like that, about what it would take and what specifically is the interest, and see, really, I'd probably try to pay attention to Council of Great City Schools of why they would, you know, do that and why their interest is as well, and look it up, and then come back and share this is the impetus for that. Yeah.
All right, so we will circle back around on this item. So Katie, if you want to move number 3 back up to the not prioritized yet, we'll circle back around on that one at our next work session when we get, you know, a little bit more clarity on that from the administration. We are 5 minutes past our work session time, and I'm sure we probably have some people waiting in the executive session. For board members, we do need to switch into a different Zoom meeting. But for this moment, we have an executive session for the purpose of negotiations. And so I need a first and a second in which to move from one meeting to the next.
I move that we move into executive session for the purpose of board negotiations.
I second.
I have a first and a second. And so I'm going to call this work session adjourned. And board members, if you can quick transition over to executive session within the next couple minutes, we will see you all there. Thank you.